Few issues have divided American politics more consistently than the question of when or whether the United States should use military force overseas. Every generation has faced defining moments that tested America's willingness to intervene beyond its borders, from the Cold War and the Gulf War to the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. By the time Donald Trump entered the White House in January 2017, much of the American public had grown weary of prolonged military engagements that had lasted for years and costed trillions of dollars and claimed the lives of thousands of American service members. Within those conservative politics, a growing movement argued that future foreign policy should place greater emphasis on protecting the Americans' interests while avoiding open ended conflicts whenever possible. Charlie Kirk became one of the most recognizable advocates of that evolving perspective and consistently supported a strong national defense while also questioning the military interventions that lacked the clearly defined objectives or exit strategies. No country represented this debate more clearly than the Islamic Republic of Iran. Since the 1979 Iranian Revolution and the subsequent hostage crises involving the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, the relations between Washington and Tehran have remained deeply stained. Over the decades, American administrations from both political parties imposed economic sanctions, challenged Iran's nuclear ambitions, and accused Tehran of supporting armed groups across the Middle East. Iranian leaders, in turn, portrayed the United States as their geopolitical adversaries, creating one of the largest running strategic rivalries in modern international relations. As the tensions increased throughout the Middle East, each new confrontation carried the possibility of escalating into a much broader regional conflict. When Donald Trump assumed office, he adopted a significantly different approach toward Iran than his predecessor. In 2018, the United States withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly known as the Iran Nuclear Agreement, while arguing that the deal had failed to adequately limit Iran's long-term nuclear capabilities and it did not sufficiently address the ballistic missile development or Tehran's regional activities. The administration replaced the agreement with what became known as the Maximum Pressure Campaign, imposing extensive economic sanctions that were designed to restrict Iran's oil exports, financial sector, and access of international markets. The supporters believed these measures would pressure Iranian leaders into negotiating a stronger agreement, while the critics argued that abandoning the existing deal had increased the regional instability and reduced diplomatic options. Throughout this period, Charlie Kirk had publicly supported many aspects of the Trump administration's broader foreign policy, while emphasizing that Americans' primary objective should remain the protection of its own national interests. Like many other conservatives aligned with the America First movement, Kirk argued the military powers should serve as a deterrent rather than become the default solution to every international dispute. He had frequently maintained that strength and diplomacy could coexist, but he also expressed concerns that prolonged wars without clear strategic goals, they often produce unintended consequences. And his comments reflected a broader discussion taking place within conservative circles, where many sought to distinguish between maintaining a powerful military and engaging in long-term nation-building campaigns abroad. One of the most consequential moments in U.S. Iran relations occurred in January of 2020, when the United States conducted a drone strike near Baghdad International Airport that had killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Quds Force. The Trump administration described Soleimani as responsible for directing operations that had contributed to the deaths of American personnel and the regional instability, while supporters of the strike had argued that the removing of Qasem Soleimani disrupted the Iranian military planning and demonstrated that American resolve. The critics, however, warned that the operation had carried significant risks of escalation and the questions whether it might bring the United States closer to a wider conflict. Iran had responded days later by launching ballistic missiles at Iraq military bases housing American forces. And although no American service members were killed in the attack, dozens were later diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries, while underscoring how quickly the tensions could escalate between two adversaries with decades of hostility between them. The events surrounding Soleimani's death intensified an already active debate inside of the conservative movement. Some of the political leaders had argued that decisive military action deterred future aggressions and reinforced the America's credibility. Others generally argued that protecting American citizens and deterring attacks were legitimate national security objectives, while also emphasizing that the policymakers should have avoided repeating the long, costly wars that had shaped the early 21st century. Now, his position reflected the increasingly influential America First philosophy, which sought to balance military strength with greater restraint regarding large-scale overseas interventions. Beyond military questions, the debate over Iran also involved energy markets, international alliances, intelligence gathering, cyber operations, and regional diplomacy. Iran's relationship with organizations such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and various armed groups operating throughout the Middle East had remained central concerns for the American policymakers and many U.S. allies. Israel's Gulf Arab states and European governments often approach these issues from different strategic perspectives. They were also illustrating that the complexity of maintaining international coalitions while responding to the rapidly changing events. Charlie Kirk frequently argued that the American leaders should carefully evaluate each decision through the lens of national interests, rather than assuming that every international crisis required direct American military involvement. The media coverage amplified every development. Cable news networks and independent commentators, podcasts, and social media platforms transformed foreign policy into a continuous public conversation, with analysts offering competing interpretations of intelligence, military strategy, diplomatic negotiations, and geopolitical risks. Charlie Kirk's podcasts and public appearances became one of many influential platforms where these issues were debated before large national audiences. And his commentary often reflected the broader concerns shared by many conservatives who believe that the American taxpayers and military families and future generations deserved careful consideration before committing the nation to additional conflicts abroad. And as the tensions involving Iran continued alongside the broader debates over Charlie's rise, Russia's geopolitical ambitions and the instability across multiple regions, America's foreign policy entered another period of intense public scrutiny. The question facing political leaders extended far beyond the individual military operations. They involved fiscal responsibility and the proper balance between deterrence, diplomacy, and military force. Charlie Kirk's views became part of that larger conversation, also representing one influential perspective within an increasingly diverse conservative movement. Yet while foreign policy debates occupied the headlines, another story was unfolding much closer to home. A story that would ultimately shift the public's attention from the questions of international strategy to the final chapter of Charlie Kirk's own life and the lasting questions that followed. That is where the next chapter of this documentary begins. I want to thank you for tuning in to the Unfiltered Political Lens, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Peace.